Welcome to the video. If you are a beginner to driving stick, or if you've never driven stick before, this is the place to go. This video is going to cover a lot of the basic stuff. If you guys are more advanced, like you've been doing a lot of motorsport stuff, or you've been doing a lot of canyon driving, and so now you're trying to get more up to speed with how to do some of the more advanced things, like that's not going to be part of this video. That's a whole different ball of wax. So we'll get into that at a later point. But for now, this is just for the people who have never driven, don't really know much about it. Maybe you've driven cars, but you haven't driven motorcycles, and so you're interested to see how that works. That's all going to be covered by this video. So if you are in that camp, welcome to it. I'm going to try and keep things as simple and basic as possible. I'm not going to introduce a lot of really heavy techniques or really heavy terms and engineering stuff. So that should help you with just getting confidence in it and getting to a point where you could do this on your own or practice these techniques in a safe location. What do I mean by safe location? As you can probably see from many YouTube videos, there are definitely places to and to not do things like this. So my recommendation is to either find a slope, and I know that sounds counterintuitive, but there's a bit of an explanation for that, or find an open parking lot with no one in it and just take your time. Give yourself space, make sure nothing's around, and use these techniques to help hone your craft. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. What we have today is I've got a foot cam here that's going to show you guys what I'm doing, sort of how the controls work, and sort of the techniques we're going to talk about. To do that, though, we need a place to do it, so let's go ahead and hop in. We're here at Auto Club Speedway in Fontana. This is iRacing. This is a racing simulator. And we're going to be using our Global MX-5 Cup car. The car that we're actually going to use in real world is also a Mazda MX-5, or a Miata, as some of you may know it. Let's go ahead and hop in. Now, the very first thing to get down is how you get started. The reason why that's a problem is because if you just put the car in gear and you let out the clutch all at once, it pretty much does that. It stalls. The answer to that is just take a little bit slower. In this case, in the game, we need to feed it a little bit of gas because the way the game works, I can't just slip the clutch out. You can in a real car and in motorcycles, but you can't really do it with this car in the game. So what that's going to look like is something like this. We rev the car up. Slowly, we let the clutch out. We hear the RPMs drop. Hold everything steady. Don't need to move it. And eventually, we can let the clutch out completely. And now we're moving. Simple. So we'll go ahead and slow down. Whenever you slow down, you have to decouple the engine from the transmission and use your brakes along with that. So you'll notice that my clutch foot is all the way to the floor and my brake foot has moved over from the gas to the brake. Your left foot generally doesn't leave the clutch. You always need it there because you're always going to be doing something with it. You're going to be shifting with it. You're going to want to slow down. There's a bunch of different things. So your right foot's going to be switching from the gas to the brake pretty frequently. That's going to be normal. If I put the car back in neutral like I just did, then we can let the clutch out. We don't need to worry about that or anything like that. But generally, you always want to keep the brake covered in the event you need to stop the car and keep it from rolling. Hopefully, like you would in an automatic car. So the next topic then is once you've gotten the car rolling, then what? Well, the next step then is to move between gears. So that means you actually go from the first gear to second, third, fourth, and so on. Gears only go so fast, meaning that they only give you so much speed. So eventually, you're going to have to move from one gear to the next if you want to keep accelerating. And most people will need to go faster than what first gear offers. First gear is typically a very, very short gear for most cars. It's just to get it rolling. It's not intended to hold the car for very long. It's really just to give it that extra leverage that it needs to move all that weight and get it rolling. Because once it's rolling, the engine has a much easier time trying to get the car to go faster. So let's go ahead and start off again. So we're going to start off in first. We're going to rev it up to 2,000 like we did before. And slowly let the clutch out. Maybe feed in a little bit of gas as we exchange clutch for gas. And now we're on our way. So now if I keep going, eventually what's going to happen is it's going to end up running out of RPM. Hear that? So at that point we need to put the clutch in, shift to second gear, and then go on from there. Now also one thing to note is that you can never start in a higher gear. So always make sure that you have your car back in first gear when you're ready to set off again. Let's go ahead and move over to motorcycles. Alright, we're going to throw a leg over the VFR and show you how to do this on a motorcycle. On the left side, we have the rear wheel and my right foot, which is the rear brake. And on the right side, we have my left hand, which is the clutch, and my left foot, which is the shifter. So we're going to put it in neutral and fire it up. The first thing that we'll do is go ahead and put the bike in gear and let the clutch out slowly to get a feel for the friction zone. You may notice as I let the clutch out that the RPMs go up a little bit. That's actually not me doing that. This bike has an anti-stall feature that will add RPM to help the bike take off from a stop. To counteract this, I'll be holding the rear wheel steady with the brake. As I let the clutch out, you'll notice the RPMs begin to drop. This is the point where the clutch begins to take up the slack between the transmission and the engine and transmit power to the rear wheel. Under normal circumstances, this is where you would begin to add throttle to accelerate the motorcycle forward. Now that we know where the friction zone is, if we continue to let the clutch out slowly enough, the bike will begin to roll all by itself. If we were on the road, we would not need to use any throttle at all. The bike would just continue to roll by itself with no input. For most people new to manual transmissions, it's worthwhile to sit in one place and run this exercise a few times to get familiar with it. This allows you to get a good grasp of where the clutch begins to take up slack, and this is also where you'll begin to learn things like creeping, like in this next example. Learning to creep with a manual transmission is very important. This enables you to maneuver any vehicle very slowly without fully disengaging the clutch or fully engaging the clutch. There are many times where you may need this, such as traffic or when you're parking, and so it's a very worthwhile skill to learn. But this implies that you know where the friction zone is to know where the friction zone starts. And of course, the natural progression is once you've learned how to take off and once you've learned how to creep, you know where the friction zone is. This means you can begin accelerating the motorcycle past the first gear and move into the next gears following that. And of course, once you've gone up gears, you eventually have to come back down gears. To do so, you pull in the clutch, add a little bit of throttle, make the shift, and then release the clutch. This is called rev matching, and this is done much like on a bicycle where you would spin faster on a bigger gear. On a motorcycle, the engine has to spin faster instead. So to do that, in between where you release the clutch, you give it a little bit more throttle. Once you know all these basics, you're ready to go. So we started in virtual with the MX-5 Cup Car, then motorcycles with the Honda VFR. Now it's time to take it to real world with our real MX-5. And as we talked about in VR, never use your leg. Always use your ankle to control the clutch, with your heel anchored to the floor. First, push the clutch all the way to the floor. Let it out slowly, listening for the engine dip. Anchor your heel into the mat, and then roll out the rest of the way on the ball of your foot. This gives you the maximum amount of control, which will enable you to have the smoothest starts. Push in the clutch, let it out, listen for the RPM drop, anchor your heel, and roll out. To demonstrate the friction zone, I'm going to balance this car on this hill using only the clutch with no gas at all. First, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and take our foot off the brake while holding the car steady with the emergency brake handle. Next, with my heel anchored to the floor, I'll let the clutch out very slowly until I feel the car start to move. Here we go, balancing the car on my heel, not using my leg. And eventually, the car begins to move. Now that the car's in motion, all I have to do is let the clutch out to make it go forward and push the clutch in to make it go backward. This kind of precise and smooth control is possible because my heel is anchored into the floor and I'm using my ankle to control the pedal, not my leg. At times you'll notice that the car starts to roll back fairly quickly, but it is entirely possible to catch the car on just the clutch alone with no throttle added. When you go to practice using the clutch, always remember to keep the brake pedal covered, pushing the clutch and brake pedals together when attempting to stop.
As you can see, a slope is perfect for practicing the friction zone. Keeping the clutch and brake covered, let the clutch in and out to manipulate the car. With enough practice, it'll make driving manual transmissions second nature. Good luck with your practice, and see you out there.